flying in IMC, your weather's probably going to be pretty terrible. You could have an abnormal engine configuration as well that's distracting you. So the procedures must be second nature. And so therefore I don't have any problem at all with the level of difficulty that the IFR exam, the IREX, is pitted at by CASA.
G'day everyone, and welcome to episode 103 of the Flight Training Australia podcast. From Hobart to Horn Island, Halls Creek to Hamilton Island, this is the podcast all about flight training and flying in Australia and beyond. I'm your host, Trent Robinson. Welcome to the podcast. Great episode today. We're going to be joined by a good friend of mine who will be sharing some fantastic information all about his career, ground school, ground theory, studying techniques, and some IREX content towards the end. But before we get into that, we have a few things going on around this country, and the accident rates, again, just seem to be spiking. I don't know why. I don't know what's going on. But please, everyone, just stay safe out there, hey? It's really one of these things that, oh God, it just troubles me, and I know it worries others. And whether it's social media, attention to aeroplanes and all this sort of stuff, are they happening more or not? The problem with the statistics on ATSB and that sort of stuff, they take a while to come out. So it's really hard to get a feel for what is actually happening or not. But just be safe. Don't push things. Don't make silly decisions. Don't feel pressured. Get help, get training, get advice, and just pull all the possible resources that you have around you at your disposal together to make good decisions and just stay safe. We all want to go home at the end of the day. It's just really, really crucial.
Okay, my next guest is a well-known aviator on the West Coast, having had a distinguished flying career and moreover as a career as an aviation theory lecturer, both in the ground school environment and universities. So welcome to Director of Flight Training Solutions, Andrew Baumanis. Andrew, how are you, buddy?
G'day, Trent. Nice to see you. And how many years have we known each other? Don't answer that.
Well, I started, in 95. So I'll let everyone do the math, which is probably a topic we'll talk about because I know that's one of your mental math is a favourite thing of yours.
Absolutely.
Mate, look, fantastic to talk to you, long overdue, and we've been in touch quite a bit, and moreover lately with some of the little projects we're chipping away at, and we'll get to that. But look, let's start at the beginning and talk about your aviation career. So first of all, what got you into aviation?
Quite interesting. When I grew up on a farm about 150 miles east of Perth near a town called Babbacombe. And Babbacombe was two buildings. It was a general store and also a post office and school. So, sorry, that's three buildings. And it must have been an RAAF training route, because quite often we would see at low level Vampire jets. That's going back a while, but we would see Vampire jets coming over at around about 200 to 300 feet. And I remember as a little tacker looking skyward at these things coming past and making a lot of noise. And from then my interest just grew. Some of you may remember the Biggles books about the theoretical World One ace. Well, I think I've read every book, and there's probably 30 or 40 of them, and I think I've read every book several times. Then during my high school years, I joined the Air Training Corps Cadets, and in my final year of school, I was awarded an Air Training Corps flying scholarship, which paid for my private license.
Perfect. Yeah.
In fact, I had my driver's license after my pilot's license, and I had several passengers that I took flying that would have to drive me to the airport so that I could take them for a joy flight.
So what was the process like? What were you flying in when you did your flight training initially? I guess we were in Tiger Moss then, or we moved on a bit?
No, we had moved on a bit. It was this. I'm not that old. It was the Cessna 150, which is now the Cessna 152. Pretty similar. The Air Training Corps Flying Scholarship was associated with the Royal Aero Club in Western Australia. And so I completed my private license with them and then continued my commercial pilot license training also with the Royal Aero Club, and then my instrument rating I completed at Astral Aviation, based at Perth Airport. The boss at Astral must have been fairly happy with me, because later on he offered me a flying job on Beech 1900 aircraft.
Yeah, awesome. I think that's someone I need to talk to as well, Ron McGrath.
Yes, well, I do believe he has finally retired and living somewhere in the East Coast, but I can give you his email address.
Yeah, no, I've got his number. I've talked to him a couple of times.
He is probably the man I respect more than anyone else in terms of how he looked after his staff, how he did his training. You knew the standard that was required, and he was absolutely fantastic to work for as well.
No, it was a privilege to get to know him. I never flew with him, but many conversations with him, and yeah, it was always great to tap into his knowledge and
Oh, absolutely.
as a mentor.
Yes, and watching his flying skills, even into his mid-70s, he and I used to fly together, and some of the approaches back into Perth that I was thinking, oh, I don't know about this, and the ILS needles just didn't move. And I remember one time even saying to him after we landed, hey, Ron, how did you do that? And he just smiled at me.
Mm. That's awesome. All right. So then, what was the flying? When was the 1900? What year?
That was probably, and in fact, it was the last of the aircraft that I flew. My very first job was flying Cessna 150 aircraft from Bankstown, where these aircraft were put together after being boxed out from Kansas in the US. And I remember flying in the 727 to Sydney in 4.5 hours, and then flying a Cessna 150 back to Perth took about 4.5 to 5 days. Headwinds often saw me going slower than the cars on the highway, and I'd be flying nearby, and I'm sure the people sitting in cars would look at me and with quite perplexed looks when they were actually travelling faster than I was. And from there, I got a job in Halls Creek, flying a Cessna 182 for a small mining company, and then went on to the Beechcraft B-58 Baron, both out of Perth and out of Jandakot. I set up my own company at one stage, was chief pilot of the company, and we had 3 Beechcraft Barons that we used to fly on, mainly fly-in, fly-out operations to mine sites. In terms of flying experiences, mine was relatively uneventful. I did have one in-flight engine shutdown when flying Metro 23 aircraft. Interestingly, it's kind of funny that in hindsight, I'm actually pleased that it happened, because I realised that the good solid training and discipline made the experience itself pretty straightforward. The passengers may relate a different story when they suddenly see a propeller stop in mid-flight. But in hindsight, as I've said, it was a worthy experience, and it showed that with good initial training and recurrency training, that what we actually trained for actually worked.
So what was the actual failure? What happened there?
We had a failure of the propeller governor oil line, and the only thing there is we do have to move fairly quickly, because when you've got a turbine spinning at 30 or 40,000 RPM and there's no oil, you've got to shut it down pretty quick. But again, we just went through the phase 1 drills, we shut it down, and the rest of the flight was uneventful. The aircraft flew beautifully on one engine and landed just like with 2 engines. And as I said, though it sounds strange, I'm glad that it happened to me, because I was then able to utilize that as part of my teaching to say, hey, I've been through the exercise, I've had an engine shutdown, and yes, it actually does fly exactly like you do in your training.
Theory delivery.
Though I never realized it, even from leaving high school. In fact, I didn't go straight into aviation. I went to university and studied medical science and worked as a medical scientist for the first 10 years of my adult life. But even during that time, I don't know what it was, but I knew I had this desire to be involved in teaching and training. And after the 10-year stint in medical science, I had my professional pilot license and all the rest. I actually said to the family, look, I want to teach. And I took a year off work, did a graduate diploma in education, happened to walk into the Royal Aero Club, right day, right time, and the boss said to me, look, we want to formalise the ground school. Do you want to take that on? Which I did, and then it just went from there. So I worked for the Royal Aero Club for about 4 years as the chief ground instructor. And around about the mid-1990s, the federal government announced that they were allowing private providers of education who could meet the minimum qualification standards to confer formal qualifications. So I applied for and worked through to get approval for everything from Certificate 1 right through to Advanced Diploma in Aviation as a registered training organisation. And I'm very proud to say if I wasn't the first, I was one of the first in Australia that achieved that for aviation studies.
Yeah, and of course that then went on to become what is today the WA Aviation College.
Yes, I actually went out on my own to do the RTO status. There is a story behind that. And set up the Western Australian Aviation College. And 30 years later, it's still active. So we must have done something right in the first place. And I worked at the Western Australian Aviation College for around about 10 years. Then felt it was time to move on. And I saw an opportunity at a university that has an aviation program. Gave that a go, got selected, and spent 14 years in academia, which included overseas stints as well, teaching. And then decided to retire. My retirement lasted about 2 years, and my wife said to me, hey, Andrew, you need to go back to work. And I now realise that retirement's not for me, so I've set up and have done now for some years ground school training again, and loving every minute of it. And am I going to retire anytime soon? And the answer is no. I still get the same thrill out of seeing students pass, graduate, and get onto flying careers. I encourage them to keep in touch with me. And in fact, with one story, I'll just quickly bore you with this one. A student I taught back in the late 1990s, and he battled, but he worked hard. And that's all I ask of a student is, if you're prepared to put in the effort, I'm going to give you the hours, whether it's in class or even out of hours later on. And I said, keep in touch. And then a couple of years ago, I got a text from him. He tracked me down. And I think I was probably as excited as him when he said to me, hey, Andrew, guess what? I've just got an A380 command. And that is, and I'm sure you in your line of work as well, when you hear that some years down the track, you feel a bit of pride. And I was so thrilled for this bloke that he had achieved, what is really the pinnacle.
Yeah, big smile, a little fist pump. You go, yes, because it is. That's really why we do what we do, isn't it? So that selfless task to give people opportunities to pursue their dreams as well.
Absolutely, yes.
No, brilliant. No, look, and it is. I've mentioned that multiple times on the podcast as well. Just one of the greatest benefits of instructing, and even just as a chief pilot or head of operations, head of flying operations, is just to see people go through your school, your company, whatever, and move on, and then hear them on the PA one day.
Yes. And recently on a trip from Perth to Brisbane, the first officer was an ex-student of mine, and it was just so exciting to hear him give the PA. And I actually told the cabinet attendant to give him my details that I'm on board, and he came back and we had a chat for a while, and it was really exciting.
All right. So moving through, what sort of changes have you seen in the kind of theory delivery and the syllabus that the CASA have put out from what you first started with to what you're seeing now?
Which subject are we talking about?
Yeah, well, that's true. Well, let's start with the sub-commercial theory to start with. So do you feel that the syllabus now has got harder or less descriptive, doesn't go as deep, or do you think it was a bit easier or better back in the beginning?
To be quite honest, from what was then basic aeronautical knowledge as now taught for the recreational pilot license, right through to the IREX, Actually, we'll leave IREX to a separate discussion, but certainly the basic concepts of aeronautics, navigation, meteorology, they haven't changed. What has changed is the format. So, for example, for many years I taught in meteorology area forecasts. Well, we don't have area forecasts. We now have graphical area forecasts. They present differently, but really it's still the same material. And when I came back to set up my programs again a couple of years ago, and I had a look at the manual of standards, there was very little that I needed to change. Now, moving on to IREX, and I've been asked about IREX from a lot of people, that hasn't really changed much either. The only thing that I've noticed that is different is as we've progressed with technology. So now we've got performance-based navigation. But the basics of IREX, your privileges, your limitations, your alternate aerodromes, none of that's changed. And when I rewrote my notes about a year ago and updated them to what is current, I made some minor changes to mainly graphical area forecasts because IREX is about flying in cloud. But the only thing that I needed to do differently was add the performance-based navigation, which is an extension of how we flew many years ago to the way we're flying now with the implementation of GNSS. And again, if you look at GNSS, and you'll have gone through this experience. Initially, it was sort of a secondary aid to navigation. And look where GNSS is now with performance-based navigation and R&P. And I think what we're talking about today is probably going to be changed sometime in the near future as technology does advance. But for those studying IREX, which I have to say is my pet area of teaching, not much has changed. And if people think, oh, beauty, GNSS, I don't need to worry about the ADF. Well, sorry, I've got bad news for you there because the ADF is still examinable and it's necessary in IFR operations. And if you think about it, who is the IREX pitted at? It's not pitted at the person that's going to be walking straight into a large airliner with all the latest bells and whistles. It's going to be to the person that's going to be working typically somewhere out in the country. And a lot of the old aircraft still have the C-129 Alpha GNSS. And if you want to plan an alternate, as you know, your alternate needs to have a ground-based aid. And so the ADF and the VOR are still assessed to this day in the IREX course.
Yeah, that they are, and airlines of various operations still rely on the ADF as an approach they need to have, and just up their sleeve. The reality of using it pretty low, but they still focus on it. So I have, as I've said mentioned many times, I've had to do some catch up ADF NDB training for someone going for a job interview or whatever else, and yeah, it can be a bit of a mind bender trying to do all that in a short period of time.
Well, one of the funniest experiences I had with teaching the ADF for some years, in years gone by, I used to do the civilian training for the flying instructors up at the RAAF base who had done their term and were getting out to get into Civvy Street from the RAAF. And sorry, guys in the RAF, but I've got to say this. They all used to bleat because they had RMIs. We have fixed card ADFs because the taxpayer pays for your aeroplane and for us, and the geometry, it was actually great fun because these guys had to do geometry to find out what their track was rather than be able to read it straight off an RMI. But it was good fun.
Yeah, I was talking to Dave Holborn a little while ago in Galway, just talking about, didn't have the full loop and sense antennas. You had to work out the 180-degree ambiguity yourself. With the sense antenna wasn't there, so we've even, at least we don't have to do that, because that would just be I think that'd be game over for many.
Yes, it certainly was for the RAF guys, but look, we had loads of fun and we all got through.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will come back to IREX in a sec, but from your experience, I get this question a lot. That should I go to university route or a ground school route? Should I self-study? And I think ultimately the self-study versus a course of training really comes down to the individual and their discipline and ability to understand what they're reading and have a good level of knowledge. But First of all, what would you recommend to someone as far as your guidance on self-study versus doing a course? And then we'll talk about the different courses available and your opinion on that.
That's a great question, particularly the self-study versus attending a course. We all know that learning to fly is not cheap, and also aviation theory courses, when you add them on as well, they're not cheap either. Most of my work has been people who have self-studied and have got a KDR. They haven't necessarily passed the exam, and then I spend quite a bit of time tutoring. If you're a self-studier, great. I have no problem with that whatsoever. Some people, and look, I'm included in that, if I want to learn something, I want to go to someone who's qualified in it, sit in their classroom and be taught properly. So it's courses for horses on that one. Now, when you talk about should somebody go to university or not, that's really how long is a piece of string type of question, because there are so many options as to what you're going to do at university. Now, around Australia, there are a small number of universities that have the 142 program incorporated into their aviation studies. So when you graduate at the end of 3 years, you'll have a Bachelor of Aviation or some equivalent name, and you'll also have your commercial pilot license. So you graduate with both. That's well and good. But there are also a lot of other universities where the study is based on a generic set of subjects to give you a rounded education level of studies. But you don't necessarily qualify in any particular field. Now, again, over many, many years, I've seen students that have gone into their aviation career and then had a medical issue where they've lost their aviation medical. And so therefore, bang goes their career path. So if you're going to go to university, my recommendation is to pick up and study something else. You know, sorry, accountants. We could talk about accounting jokes, but we best not. But I mean, it's an important career path. You know, I know people that have gone into accounting or gone into some form of business or something totally unrelated. Engineering is another one where I've seen a lot of pilots go from engineering into aviation at a later date. You could lose your medical. There's also people who have flown for a while and realised flying's not for me. And so they've got a bit of fallback. So I'm a bit reluctant to give advice on it, but if I was to give advice on it, I'd say study something other than aviation and qualify that you've got that there as a fallback at a later date. Now, with the aviation studies at university, and I was in academia for 14 years, we also need to look at the way students pass or fail. Don't like to use the word fail. Pass or not pass.
Fall short.
Fall short of the minimum required. Now, universities require you to get 50% in an exam. Now, I taught aviation CASA subjects, and you know, students would get between 50 and 70%. So they've passed the university requirements. But the CASA standard for aviation is 70%. And it's a fixed 70%. You either achieve 70%, and if you don't, then you've got to be invited to come back and sit the exam again. Whereas universities have a different structure in the way the marking and assessment takes place. And it's also fluid, and it's based on 2 standard deviations and a whole lot of other criteria. But I've had many students that have passed their university course, but they can't pass CASA exams. Or haven't passed the CASA exams because, let's keep it in basic terms, to get through university, you need to get 50%. To pass CASA exams, apart from law, which is 80%, all the other subject areas have a pass mark of 70%, and it's a rigid 70%. So I've seen over the years frustration from students who say, look, I'm passing the university subject, but I'm not passing the CASA subject. And
you're not doing the CASA exams at uni either, eh? They're over and above.
Correct. Yes, they are separate. I also wonder whether, you know, we can get quite philosophical here as to the mentality of a lot of people. And look, I've got to say, I will include myself in this mentality, is that if I have to get 70% and I get 70%, I'm happy. or 50% to pass at uni, and I'm happy because I've passed. Really, you should be saying, my goal is to get 100%. And if you're only aiming at 70 or aiming at 50, that's what the maximum is that you are psychologically going to achieve. Whereas if you say, I'm going in there to get 100% and you get 90%, you've still passed and you might not have achieved the goal that you've set yourself. But there is a mental approach to saying, not what do I need to just get through, but you should always go into an exam with the aim of achieving 100%.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think this is, again, then when we get down to the differences between self-study and doing a course. But either way, at least in a course, you've got a facilitator directing you to the points in a syllabus that are really, you need to know this. This is stuff you're going to use versus this is more aimed at exam content. And after this, you can kind of push it aside.
That's an interesting point. Some years ago, back in the 1990s, there was an advisory panel to flight crew licensing that was convened for a variety of reasons, and I was a member of the panel for 3 years. And I remember raising this exact topic with the then head of flight crew licensing. And the topic actually came up is, what is the average person interested in doing? Are they interested in learning or are they interested in passing an exam? And I'm going to leave that without adding to that.
Yeah, I think the exam becomes the objective. And like I said, even with the way some of those questions are worded, it then becomes down to that translation of what the hell is this question even asking? What's this got to do with, the price of bread? And yeah, it is. It's distracting, isn't it? Whereas I've always said I would much rather 100 orally asked questions from a human that aren't convoluted and negative reverse sense, which is more correct, process. So I can actually assess someone's knowledge rather than their ability to translate an exam.
You're quite correct. And look, part of any course that I do, or even if I'm tutoring somebody on a one-on-one basis, something that is really, really big with me is exam technique. And over the years, I've been teaching now for over 35 years, and I've been surprised sometimes at students that I think not only are they going to pass, they pass well, and they actually fail. And so I've incorporated exam technique as part of my course material, as I said, whether it be one-on-one tutoring or whether it be in the, an IREX course or a PPL course or whatever else. And I will indulge myself with this particular subject because I think this is really, really important because people go about exam sitting incorrectly. Now, the first thing is if you're going to be sitting an exam and you go in there with a completely laid back, should be right attitude, no nerves, no sort of apprehension, there's a good chance you're going to fail. Now, I know myself and people I've talked to, even now, if I'm going to sit an assessment of any kind, even though I feel I know my material quite well, I'm going to be a little bit nervous. And people will open up the exam paper and they'll look at the question, and question one, and they're sitting and they're staring at it for a while because it's probably the hardest question for them in the whole of the exam. And then while they're doing it, they look at the clock and see that they're wasting time. So that's just going to psychologically add more pressure to you. And something that I was taught many years ago, which, and this isn't, so it doesn't come from me, I'm just forwarding this on from somebody who taught me. You don't have to you don't have to answer the questions in any order. Now, you go to an exam, you look at question one, not sure, leave it. Go to question two, not sure, leave it, and so on and so forth. Now, if you've prepared yourself for an exam and you've done the right amount of study, you're going to know at least half the material as if it's too easy. So the first time around, if you're not sure of a question, leave it and go on to one that you say, oh, that's easy. I know the answer to that. Oh, that's easy. I know the answer to that. And when you've gone through that paper, that's then opened up your brain to areas that you thought, I think I know, or I now know the answer to that. You can go back and answer the question, and you can go through the paper 3 or 4 times. First of all, answering the ones that are obvious. These then open up your brain cells to things that now you do know. And by the time you've gone through the paper 3 or 4 times, you'll take a typical 3-hour exam. You'll have gone through and completed now, out of 40 questions, probably 25 to 30, and you look at the clock and you've got an hour to spare. You can sit back and relax and say, hey, look, I've only got 10 questions to go and I've got a full hour. And you can chill out and take your time to then work through the things that you're not sure of. Look, and that works. And I've seen students who've had difficulty with exams over many years who have suddenly used that technique and found that they're getting through really well.
Yeah, I think practice exams are absolutely crucial in that whole process, because, again, it's the only way to really know whether you do know what you think you know or not, and understand how to answer the questions, not just interpret what you're seeing in the textbook or hearing in class.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, CASA's got a job to do, and it's a very, very important job to do. They have got to regulate and they've got to enforce rules and et cetera, et cetera. And look, I'm probably like anyone in terms of criticising some of the questions that I've had feedback about from the student after they've sat an exam. Look, it is what it is. There's no point complaining about it. But exam technique and knowing how multi-choice questions are to be answered. Now, we could talk about that as well for a lengthy period of time. And multi-choice is a challenge on its own. And again, if I can just indulge myself for a short period of time, as an example, now I've mentioned IREX. I do like teaching IREX and feel I know it fairly well. Again, back in the 1990s, there was a period where the exams used to be sat at set times through the year. You couldn't just book in and go and sit an exam. They were once every 3 months. And if you failed, you had to wait another 3 months before you could sit it again. And there was an IREX sitting, and it was at the time I was on the advisory panel, so I had quite a bit to do with this. There was an IREX sitting where around Australia there were something like 205 or 206 students sat the exam, and something like 200 failed it. And there was huge hue and cry from the industry, and pressure was put on CASA to do something about it. So what they did was they asked the 6 of us that were on the advisory panel, because we were all IFR pilots as well, to sit the exam under CASA supervision and then give a report on the exam. Part of what I'm about to say includes my early discussion about exam technique. Now, I sat the exam and there were 40 questions. When I handed the paper to the invigilator to mark, I was absolutely convinced I got 100%. I didn't. I got 3 questions wrong out of 40, so I still passed. And I got quite indignant about this, and I thought, how dare you? You know, I know my stuff. And in each case, I didn't read the question properly. And so we know the expression RTQ. Read the question, and yes, I know there are variations on that acronym. As an example, and I can still remember one of the questions that I got wrong. And this is going back in the day before CTAFs, when we had these areas that had physical dimensions, both vertically and horizontally, called mandatory broadcast zones. And a mandatory broadcast zone, I can't actually remember what the physical dimension was. Can you?
15 miles.
Yeah, 15, yeah. And the height was 5,000 feet. And so the question said, which of the following is correct regarding the physical dimensions of the Kingscote, South Australia mandatory broadcast zone? And one of the answers was 15 miles and 5,000 feet. So I just put that down. But I got it wrong. Now, they gave me a location. And what I was supposed to do, quite correctly, was look up that location. And because of overlaying CTA, the limit was something like 3,000 feet. So I got it wrong. And I got it wrong not because I don't know my subject area, but I got it wrong because I didn't read the question carefully, which I found extremely annoying.
Yeah, well, that would be an example of the Kingscote MBZ versus what is the dimensions of a standard MBZ. And so it's just that intricate wording that can catch you out. I remember the one, I complain about it all the time, which is when you had to get a forecast. And if you couldn't get it, you could get it on the radio. And so the wording in the AAP was within 30 minutes of departure. So if you left at 11 o'clock and you got your forecast at 11:30 and you're happy that you can return by 12 within an hour, could you go? And I go, yeah, of course you can. but I'm 1 second too late because it's within 30 minutes and 11:30 is 1 second to past within. And I'm like, what is this asking me?
Yes.
I know the reference,
Yes.
the method, like, and who the hell is really going to turn around? Sorry, Brisbane Centre, I can't take that forecast now. I'm 1 second overdue. I have to turn back.
Yes. Yep, correct. Now, just extending on to where we are now with feedback to the student, and that is the knowledge deficiency report. And over the years that knowledge deficiency reports have been in play, I've had a lot of negative comments from students who have sat an exam and failed it. And the first person or the first organisation they blame is CASA. And they say, oh, I failed because CASA's written some terrible questions and et cetera, et cetera. And the KDR, unfortunately, I don't believe gives a student a good indicator of where they went wrong. For example, if I got that MBZ question wrong, the KDR statement would be a generic statement to say, know the physical dimensions of an MBZ. Well, I know them,
Yeah.
and yet I still got it wrong. So, for example,
Yeah.
a student might get a question wrong on a point of no return. Now, again, this was going back to late last century, but under CASA supervision, I was allowed to go through an exam with a student who was blaming CASA. He made a lot of noise and he blamed CASA for the fact that he failed. So I sat down with him with his KDR and he said, look, I know, and it was PNR. I remember there was a PNR. It was a 5 marker that he got wrong, which if he'd got right, he'd passed. And it wasn't until he realized that he had made a mathematical mistake. So when we left, I said to him, so did CASA fail you or did you fail yourself? And he muttered, rah, 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 rah. He said, yeah, okay, fine, I screwed up. So I would like to think that there is a better way of giving students feedback about where they went wrong.
Yeah, did I read the question wrong, or do I really not know the subject? And that's a very subjective thing to try and feed back to someone without actually having the opportunity as a ground school instructor to see the actual question.
Yeah, absolutely correct.
Which is where the practice exams really come in, where they are worded similarly, and that's your best chance of not getting caught.
Yes, yes. But in an exam, look, and we're all human. I make mistakes as well, and I've like in the IREX where I got those questions wrong. But when you get it wrong, if you don't get sufficient feedback, it's very hard to know what the right answer is or why you got it correct. And look, reading the question carefully is very, very important. You and I both just given an example of a situation where not reading a question correctly has given us the wrong answer, even though we know our subject material. So that's why I do spend, so there's a couple of reasons now you can see why I actually spend quite a bit of time during a course, not just discussing the content, but also how to tackle exam questions. I've seen too many students that have failed who shouldn't have done because they know their subject material, but they've just misread something or made a mathematical mistake.
Yeah. So, what advice would you have for someone? I've had many students who don't feel academically smart enough to pass the exam, so they might opt not to try and do a PPL because they just don't think they're going to get through it. They're very bright and very intelligent in all other areas, but just when it comes to this sort of thing, they struggle. What would you say to sort of help them over the line and give them that confidence?
I think I'd have to be very careful how I answered that one. There are ground schools and there are ground schools. And look, to be quite blunt about it, there are a lot of people who haven't necessarily succeeded in aviation in their chosen career and think that they can just regurgitate. Teaching's a skill, and you know that as well as I do. You've been a very good instructor and assessor for many, many years. And look, it is a skill. Perhaps go and look towards someone else. And look, if somebody is struggling, if I can put my my own advertising in there, I'm a person that everyone will tell you I'm an aviation tragic, and we'll talk aviation for all day. If they need some assistance, is to seek that assistance from an independent person. It's sort of similar to what I've seen when people learn to fly, and they're unhappy with their flight school. And when I ask them why they're unhappy with their flight school, they're actually not unhappy with the flight school. They're spending a lot of money sitting next to a person. Now, we all have people that we get on with and we don't get on with. And sometimes, you just don't gel. So my advice is get another instructor. From the flying perspective, you're spending a lot of money. It's very important that you've got somebody that you can interact and relate with. And the same applies to ground school as well, is to seek independent advice. Now, look, I'm in the business of teaching ground school. I also do a lot of tutoring. Look, there are others I've seen on the web. There are plenty of people. So, yeah, look, I'd love you to come to me, but go and ask somebody else for their input into an area that the student might be struggling with. And in fact, it's quite funny because the one, and I know you're going to laugh, ADF intercepts. People hate them. They're in the IREX exam, and having to teach them is quite challenging.
Yeah, and I'm glad I leave that bit to you, because the HAT principle, as we know, has nothing to do with flying practically. It's purely a paper-based orientation exercise.
Absolutely, yes.
All right. Well, what about the other question I got was that I've failed twice. So now I've got the pressure of that third exam coming up. And if I don't pass that, it's a 3-month wait and I have to get signed off eventually. Actually, no, it's a 3-month wait. If I fail the fourth time, then I have to get signed off by a ground instructor.
Yes, that's correct.
Ready to sit. So what sort of advice would you give someone that's coming up to that third exam, just to help get over the line? There's clearly an issue, and it's probably more exam technique, I would say, than potentially knowledge, but sometimes it can be.
Yeah, look, that's a good question, and it would depend on the mark they've got. If they're around that sort of 60-ish mark, there's probably something that you can do with. And again, look, I've had students over the years that, going on what I said earlier, that something's not clicking. I've actually recommended they go and see someone else and said, hey, look, just get another person's interpretation of it. And that may make the, as we used to say in the old days, make the penny drop. With a 1 cent piece, we can't even say that anymore. I don't think there are 1 cent pieces. Where suddenly, well, the light bulb comes on, and you suddenly, by somebody else's explanation, it falls in place. For those students that are getting sort of 50%, and if you get less and you don't even get a KDR, then you really need to back off and think about doing a second course with someone. And look, you and I both have had students that have been in this situation that just blindly go ahead and give it a crack, hoping that they will pass. But if you're getting low marks, then really you need to back off and say, firstly, let's be totally cruel about it and say, hey, is this really for you? If you've actually gone and done a course and it's just not working, you may need to have a rethink. That's just the fact of life. I'd like to be a brain surgeon, but I know that I wouldn't have the skills to be able to be one. And if you've self-studied, perhaps you do need to do a course. Look, it's a hard one to answer, depending on...
It is. It's a lot of variables, obviously.
There is a lot of variables. How much have you failed by? And really, and the question that I ask when, and I do a lot of KDR reviews for students before they go back and sit an exam again. One of the questions I also ask is, of the questions that they got correct, how many of them did they actually get by good luck or good management? And again, I had a student just recently failed an exam by, I think it was 2 questions. So we had a tutoring session, and they went back and they got less than 50% the second time around, which was no KDR. And that's why I asked the question when I said, look, when you sat the exam the first time, how much of it you actually guess? And you really had a good guessing day rather than actually knowing the content. And that person sort of went, yeah, I probably really need to go and do a course.
Yeah. Well, let's look at IREX a bit more detail, because I think, as we said before, I really believe IREX is a little bit different in that ATPLs, in a way, you can study, but most people aren't going to use it for a long time. It's very generic because there's so many different aircraft you could fly and everything else. Whereas IREX is actually one of these theory units that you actually do need to know it all because you're going to use it all. When you come down and pop out down the bottom, you need to know what minima you're going to, what QNH variations to go, how to assess whether you've got the visibility and requirements, and do you need to do a missed approach and order? Can I continue straight ahead, or do I have to circle? And you've got to do all that in a blink of an eye. So this is stuff that you really do need to know.
You're absolutely correct. And compared to other subjects, well, if you think about when you're flying under the IFR, you don't see what you could potentially hit. Controlled flight into terrain or CFIT accidents continue to take place. So IFR is very procedural, and you've got to know your procedures. And if you don't know your procedures, then you could come to grief very, very quickly. And it is one subject where, and look, I've had this conversation time and time and time again, like, for example, sector entries. And the sector entries, and to quote my old boss, Ron, he said, I don't know who invented the sector entries as they are, but they certainly weren't a pilot. Look, they are challenging, but there's a reason for it. They are ICAO standard, and the wise people in ICAO have said, look, this is the way we're going to go about them. And they've got a reason. Sometimes I've often wondered, it doesn't make sense. But if you follow the procedure, then there's a good chance that you'll be able to fly that aeroplane another time.
Yeah, I think that's important to note as well. That there's a lot of things we do that just seem madness. But I'll break off IFR for a second and talk about VFR or VMC. In Darwin, we've got now clouds and Class C airspace that makes maintaining VMC very difficult, which brought about the well-coined term of territory VFR. But I thought, there's got to be more to this, but it's not CASA. This is an ICAO internationally standard accepted separation criteria. So it is just, this is what we've got. We've got to work with, and it's good enough for a global standard. So we've just got to learn how to do it the best way possible.
Yes, and see, again, on that, looking at some instrument approach plates, people don't understand also their aircraft performance, how heavy it is, what's the temperature and pressure of the day. And you have a look at, for example, there's an instrument approach called an LNAV, VNAV, or even with some ILSs, and you'll find that you won't have a published decision altitude at which you've got to go around if you're not visual. You'll have a couple, and there's a percentage value next to it. Now, what are the conditions? Is your aircraft got one engine out? What's your climb gradient going to be like? And so therefore you'll have a height that will say, right, if you can achieve a 4% climb gradient, then your minima can be a certain value before you have to go around if you're not visual. If you can't achieve that climb gradient, they publish a second value, 2.5%, which is the minimum legally required, to say you're going to have a higher missed approach altitude. So having that understanding, but then also being aware of situational awareness of your particular aeroplane on a particular day. How heavy is it? Have you got the aircraft configuration correct? Am I going to be able to achieve a particular go around? Because if you can't achieve the climb gradient, you're going to, fly into a bit of territory, and you don't want to do that.
Yeah, well, and the same, we used to pull the whiz wheel out and add a difference to the minima for asymmetric operations. If it's all the same thing, isn't it? But if you don't know to do that,
no,
you're just going to blissfully be going around misapproaching and getting away with it until one day possibly, God forbid you don't.
Yes, and look, a lot of the IREX exam is pitted at those sort of questions. And I don't have any problem with that, because there is a huge jump from flying VFR where you can see and avoid to flying in IMC. And also, you're flying in IMC, your weather's probably going to be pretty terrible. You could have an abnormal engine configuration as well that's distracting you. So the procedures must be second nature. And so therefore, I don't have any problem at all with the level of difficulty that the IFR exam, the IREX, is pitted at by CASA.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's do a little IREX course preview, and we'll talk about one of the things that we've raised, which is the hat principle. So, what sort of advice would you give people that are struggling with this?
Okay, I do a slight variation on hat. The way I teach ADF intercepts is you've got to ask yourself 3 questions. And time again, and I've seen this hundreds of times, the candidate will not do this in the correct order. So, for example, we're sitting here. Okay, we're talking over Zoom, and you're in Darwin and I'm in Perth. And if I said to you, which way to the bathroom, you would point in a particular direction. So I'm going to go in that direction. But I could be in another part of the house where you'll point in a different direction. So the way I do ADF intercepts is exactly the same. The first thing we need to know is, where am I in space? Okay, and my heading and my ADF combination will tell me where I am, either tracking from an NDB or tracking to an NDB. So that's the first question that needs to be asked, because you don't know where to go until you know where you are to start with. So question one is, where am I? Question two is, where do I want to go? In other words, what is in the exam, where has CASA said to track towards a different track? And on that one there, I've got two expressions that I regularly use through any course. One is RTQ, or RTFQ, if I'm allowed to say that one. And the other one, which particularly applies to this, which anyone who's been through my courses will be sick and tired of hearing me, is DABD. Draw a bloody diagram. Don't try and do it in your head. In the classroom, okay, it's a different situation. But in the classroom, draw a diagram, draw the NDB, draw your heading and ADF to say, right, where am I? That's the first thing to do. And then draw the line to say, well, where do I want to go? Because as soon as you know where you want to go, you know if you need to turn left or you need to turn right. So the third question is, which way do I turn? And then the principle of an ADF intercept, of course, is simply heading plus or minus the angle of intercept to give you the heading that you're going to steer. The biggest challenge I've found with these is people pretty much get the hang of those for outbound intercepts, because it's conventional compass numbers. So as you turn right, compass numbers increase.
Yeah.
But of course, when you're tracking to an NDB, you have to turn in the opposite direction. And to be totally honest about this, when I did my instrument rating many, many, many years ago, somebody said to me, with inbound intercepts, think outbound, turn opposite. And I actually got through by doing that without really knowing what I was doing, which really isn't a very smart move.
We always do the oil outbound to inbound, long way around.
Yeah.
And if you look at the holding patterns, or not the holding patterns, but the sector entries, the reversals, that's exactly what they're doing. They're taking the long way around, otherwise you're turning away from the aid.
Correct.
And like you say, draw a diagram.
Yeah.
It's very obvious.
Yes, draw a diagram. And the other thing as well, people seem to think we have a paper shortage. And they will draw this tiny little 1 centimetre by 1 centimetre diagram on an A4 bit of paper. No, you've got a whole page. Utilise the page. And if in the exam you need some more paper, the invigilator will give you some more paper.
Yeah, if Dad's listening to this one, he'll be laughing, because it was always over my shoulder. And so it's not bloody keyhole surgery. Use the page. Exactly.
So what is it about human nature that we all draw these tiny little diagrams when we've got a whole page to utilise it? But so that's the way I teach ADFs, is where am I? Where do I want to go? Draw them on a bit of paper, and then you can quite clearly see, put a little aeroplane model on it, and you can see exactly which way you're going to turn. And it makes it quite easy. I know it works because my students get through their IREX exam.
Yes, exactly. Yep, the hat principle, it does get you through.
Yes, absolutely correct. And then people like you terrorise them in the aeroplane.
Yep, we got to do it all a different way.
It is a lot different in the exam or in the theory room as compared to practically. And I've often wondered, and something that I've considered, I know there's a couple of places in the States that do it, and I've kind of had a peek at their websites, is it's probably an exam that having some simulator time during the studies to actually be able to demonstrate what is a highly procedural process may help in the understanding of it.
Yeah. All right. What about effective ways to remember lighting requirements for alternates? This seems to trouble people a lot as well.
Yes, there are two areas that I've consistently seen in KDRs where people come unstuck, and one of them is alternate aerodromes. And typically it is the lighting requirements at night that mess people around. I don't think, and look, this is one that I've given a lot of thought to over many, many years. And I don't think there's any way around any acronyms or sayings or whatever else. You've just got to learn. And it really isn't that difficult. If you don't have electric lighting with standby power, there's going to be something that's required, whether it be a responsible person to put out portable lighting or whatever else. So electric lighting, standby power, box tick, don't need to worry about it under any circumstances. But as soon as you don't have that, okay, but the trick is, oh, hang on, we got PAL. So then this is pilot activated lighting, where what if my key doesn't work, or what if the PAL, and I've actually had a PAL failure with minimum fuel on board and a plane load of passengers. It was at Meekatharra many, many years ago, and we had to call Melbourne Centre and get somebody, and it was the police. Long story, the police had to go to the pub to get the refueler who was in charge of it to come out the aerodrome and manually turn it on. I mean, that could have turned to something really seriously bad. So these things do happen. So electric power, and the thing is that most aerodromes now do have power. So as soon as you've got pilot activated lighting, it can fail. And if it does fail, you're going to have a problem. So immediately, if you've got PAL, then you need to plan either for an alternate or have a responsible person who can come out and manually turn it on, or portable lighting or some other option. But certainly with the lighting one, and look, it is a hard one. And the reason being, or another reason for it, is that if you look at the way it's worded about the alternate aerodrome, they actually have statements in the AIP, first of all, about the lighting requirements, and then it says for alternate aerodromes. And a lot of people read that as saying, oh, if the following applies, that's when I need an alternate. No, this is talking about the lighting requirement at the alternate.
The second airport.
Yeah, which is different. And the way I try to describe it is like, for example, you don't need standby power. If you are nominating because of lighting, you don't need standby power at your secondary airport. Something that I don't agree with for a lot of reasons, but you don't. And what CASA is saying is, look, your chances of a primary lighting failure at two different aerodromes on the one night is highly unlikely. However, I don't believe that necessarily to be true, because if you don't have standby power, very often your alternate aerodrome is not going to be necessarily that far from your destination aerodrome, and may be under the same grid from the main power source for that particular country or state or wherever you happen to be. I do have.
Well, I think some of the onus is that your radio equipment to activate the lighting is more likely to be the problem than the actual power, which is what explanation I've got as well. That the likely, and therefore then the likelihood of two airports failing, and your radios, it's a bit of a pretty bad night.
Yeah, you've had a bad day and you shouldn't have gone flying, or a bad night. It's interesting, you're talking about the radio failures, and I've had a couple of those over the years, that the two VHFs is only a requirement at your alternate aerodrome. It's not a requirement for your primary aerodrome.
Yeah, and like you say, separating the two. And I think the way I'd teach it as well is just try and think about it as a practical way. That if there's no one else there and you get there and the lights aren't working, what are you going to do? So if there isn't an automatic function or someone to do the job for you, you need to have an alternate.
Yes.
And up here at the Territory, there's not that many aerodromes that do have PAL. Most of them are, apart from the primary ones, or they're on all the time. The rest are all the solar lighting. So that's all portable. Unless we call an ARO out to hang around and put some more out, or keep an eye on them, that's an automatic alternate. So yes, you have to find a PAL airport, and there's not many of those. So it can get very constrictive up here.
Yeah, I agree. And this is why I always say to students, always carry a little bit of extra fuel.
Yeah, always.
If possible.
All right. One more question that pops up every now and then is, and I know the answer, but it seems to be a few people raise this. Can a Category B aircraft, for example, operate as a Category C aircraft?
Yes. Now, this is one that, don't tell CASA I said this, but I have seen a question around this in the CASA exam. And what it talks about in the AIP is, if you're a Category B aircraft, now one aircraft I know that this applies to is the F50. Now, the F50's got these very high aspect ratio wings, and it's to do with the speeds for performance. and the speeds for performance because of these high aspect ratio wings are higher than what are actually in Category B. So though it's a Category B aircraft by definition because of its approach speed, its manoeuvring speeds fall into Category C.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it says in the AOP, that if the handling speeds put you into that category, you can upgrade, but you can't just put yourself in Cat C because you want to.
No. And the other question that comes up is, can you, for example, you're a Category B aircraft, and because you're very light on in weight, can you downgrade to Category A? And the answer is no, you can't. And the only time you can upgrade for the reasons that we've just discussed. Yeah. And look, as I said, don't tell CASA, but there's something along those lines that I've had feedback on. We'll keep it a secret.
Yeah, well, that's it. The only thing you can really do is if you wanted to depart and use the Category C circling area because it's a survey clear area, you could use that, but it doesn't make you a Cat C aeroplane.
No. And look, there are areas. Look, Perth Airport's one where for a Category B aircraft, for a Category C or D, I can't remember off the top of my head, the circling area, because of its distance from Perth Airport, is a no circling area at night time or an IMC. But for a Category B aircraft, it doesn't apply because it has a smaller circling area. So again, this is where, like I gave you my example about the MBZ where I got the question wrong, whenever a question asks about a particular aerodrome, please look up the information about that aerodrome, because it's bound to be something that is the exception to the rule.
Yeah, there's a gotcha.
Yeah.
It's not just Adelaide arrival curfew times.
That's correct. That's another one. Yeah.
All right. Well, when do you think is the good time to do your IREX theory? When you're doing your PPL CPL theory, depending on where you want to finish, or do you reckon it's good to go get a job and come back to it later?
To be honest, I was hoping you wouldn't ask me that question because it's a really hard one to answer.
It is.
And the reason being is a good time to do it from a mind on the job is immediately after you've passed your PPL and CPL and you're in study mode. And because you're in study mode, it's easier to go to that extra level and be able to get through the exam. But then typically what you'll end up doing is that you are then going to head out. You're either going to be flight instructor flying basic training, or you're going to go out in the middle of nowhere and fly aircraft around in VFR operations over 12 months or whatever it is before the company says, hey, head off and do your instrument rating. In the meantime, that knowledge has degraded. And so that can be a little bit more challenging when you go back to do the actual IFR flying. The other thing that's happened with that situation as well is what I've seen over the years, people who haven't done the IREX because they've said, look, I want to do it when I do my IFR flying. And they've done those studies for, say 12 months, and they come back and they book themselves in for 4 weeks to do the two. Now, I've seen this a lot.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
And it doesn't work because the student can't pass the IREX. And then, of course, they've wasted a whole lot of time and money to no avail. So bearing that in mind, I think probably pass the exam, get it out of the way, because at least it's not going to be a hold up to you physically going and doing your flying training. But please, before you do, sit down and go through your IREX material again, because like you've already said, it is the one subject where what you actually learn in the IREX exam, you are actually going to practice. And so therefore, there's two ways. You can say, right, I want to front up to the exam. Now, what does it cost for a twin engine aircraft per hour?
Oh, depends on the platform. It can be $600 to $1,000.
Yeah, okay. So you front up without any prior knowledge, you're just going to waste money. So therefore, look, sit the exam. But before you actually do, when the company says, hey, look, you've done your 210 time and we want to upgrade you to a twin and all the rest, go back to wherever you want to and do your instrument rating, then spend the time going back and revising all the procedures and exactly what needs to be done so that when you hop into the airplane, you're not wasting time and money, and it just works.
I think that's the most common answer. If you've got the opportunity to do it, you're in study mode, get it done. but just be realistic about then when it comes time to use it. As I say, A, I won't start an instrument rating without it, and B, I'll also say I'm not here to get you up to speed and all the theory. I'm here to show you how to apply it. And so it's going to cost you more in briefing time and unsuccessful sim sessions and even potentially flights because you're behind the eight ball. Because when I'm an IREX exam in myself, there's so much practical knowledge and application that you haven't got time to take it all in. And I want you to be a evolved, developed, industry ready instrument rated pilot, not just we just got through.
Absolutely correct. Now I can take that one step further. Something else that I did in years gone by, after talking to an IFR testing officer, who we had long chats about this particular subject area. He said it doesn't just apply to the person coming up for their initial issue of their instrument rating, but also people that have gone and done their instrument rating as well, and they've come up for their IPC in 12 months' time. And part of the IPC includes some oral questions beforehand. And this particular examiner has said he has failed candidates before they've even got in the aeroplane, because they've even forgotten simple things like how to read a TAF, because they've not looked at one for 12 months. So suddenly they've forgotten about it. Now, examiners don't come cheap, and it's, sorry, we're not going flying because your theory knowledge is not up to standard. So therefore, it doesn't just apply, get it out of the way. And we've talked about making sure that you're up to speed before you do your initial instrument rating. For those of you that are out there that have got instrument ratings, and you're out in the boonies doing, 210 stuff and all the rest and gaining hours and not really applying that knowledge whatsoever. But when you go to do your IPC, the same applies there as well for exactly the same reason.
Yeah, that's exactly why I've done a lot of episodes on the subject matter, because people don't realize what they don't know. I mean, I had someone the other day, exactly that. We didn't go flying, failed the theory component because it was telling me there was a tempo or an inter, so they had to allow fuel for it because they thought there's an inter, whereas the inter contents were actually above the alternate minima, so it didn't apply to us at all as an IFR.
Funny you should mention that, because the one thing that this examiner here in Perth mentioned to me was the number of people that could not read a TAF.
Yeah, and there's some fantastic resources on the Bureau of Met website. Takes you all through the TAF, how it works, the GAF, that sort of stuff. There's some YouTube videos, plus the AIP itself. And then if you can't figure that out, then come and see the likes of us, and we'll help you out.
Yeah, on that subject, again, for those that have been out that have already passed, you may or may not be aware, depending on whether you've looked at the AIP, that a whole lot of the AIP Gen 3.5 meteorology section has been removed, and it's been taken over and put into the aviation section of the Bureau of Meteorology. And if you want to do any revision of meteorology associated with aviation, go to the Bureau of Meteorology website, click on the aviation link and the Knowledge Centre, and it is full of some absolutely fantastic stuff.
That Knowledge Centre is really, really good.
It is.
Awesome. All right. Well, mate, look, thank you. Some fantastic tips. Awesome, info there. And I hope that will help everyone who is studying, regardless of what exam they're doing. But if people want to get in touch with you, do they have to be in Perth, or can they do stuff online with you like we are now? How does it work?
All my work is done online using Zoom. I do have a website. I've just got to correct you, Trent. Sorry, but you did say earlier Flight Theory Solutions. It's actually Flying Theory Solutions.
Oh, what did I say before? All right, I'll fix that up.
Yeah, it's a beer you owe me. And also on the website is my phone number, and I'm happy for people to give me a call. Please not at 2:00 in the morning, but give us a call. And look, I'm happy to chat. Look, my wife will tell you I'm an aviation tragic, and when somebody rings up about anything aviation, she just gets up and walks off, knowing that I'm going to be spending an hour talking to somebody. So look, I'm happy to help. And look, even after 35 years of teaching, if somebody's come to me for help or for a course, because I do run courses as well, and at the end of the day, they ring me up and say, hey, guess what? I've passed. I'm probably just not quite, but just about as happy as they are as well, because it gives me a thrill to know that I've been able to guide them through the material.
Yeah, well, look, I can as we talked about, the quality of ground school and flight instructing and all that, it really depends on the people that you come in contact with. You've been doing it for years now, and I know that anyone who knows you will rave about your standards and quality and knowledge of information. And even just with your recent, I guess is what was sort of got us back in touch a little bit a couple of years ago, and you got into drones and getting into sections of the regs you've never read before. Your knowledge and understanding of it all is second to none. So I can definitely recommend people get in touch with you and look you up. So Flying Theory Solutions, all the links will be in the episode description, and definitely can support. If not Andrew, get someone in your local area that's definitely able to help you through that and give you that depth of knowledge that's needed, not just get through the exam questions.
Sounds good. Look forward to it.
All right. Thank you very much for all your time.
And thank you, Trent, for the invitation.
You're welcome. We'll talk to you again soon.
Okay, thanks. All the best.
Thanks again, Andrew, for joining me. Andrew from Flying Theory Solutions. Got it right that time. And look, I have known Andrew for a long time, and anyone from a WA aviation background, I'm sure, has come across him at some point in time. And I'm sure you can hear, just with him talking there, his passion for aviation, and he knows his stuff very, very well. And he is just as friendly on a personal Zoom call. So I do encourage you to take that up. IREX is his big focus, but of course he can help with anything. Group sessions obviously going to be cheaper. Otherwise, individual classes are also available. So get onto him and custom fit something that's going to fit into your time frame and get the benefit of being led through this theory. Yes, you can self-study, but I can promise you will understand and know so much more by using someone like Andrew's skill set, and also getting the just the in-depth knowledge that you can apply to any other areas of your aviation studies, and it will build and build as you go through. All right, as always, all the links in the episode description. Take care, guys. Blue skies, and remember the golden rule: aviate, navigate, communicate. Cheers, everyone.